New York stands as one of the most economically powerful yet deeply unequal places in the United States, where towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over streets that thousands call home, and as property values climb higher each year. Driven by demand, limited space, and global investment, the gap between those who own homes and those who have none continues to widen, creating a silent crisis that unfolds every single day across boroughs like Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, where the average home value has surged into the hundreds of thousands and often millions of dollars, pushing low-income residents further out or onto the streets entirely. And within this reality lives the story of homelessness, not as a statistic but as a human experience shaped by economic pressure, mental health struggles, addiction, systemic failures, and sometimes simply bad luck, where individuals wake up each morning not to an alarm clock but to the noise of traffic, the cold bite of the air, or the constant need to stay alert for safety, carrying their lives in bags, moving from shelter to sidewalk to subway stations, navigating a system that offers help but often not enough, not fast enough, or not in a way that meets their needs, while families, yes, entire families, find themselves living in temporary shelters, single rooms, or overcrowded spaces, children growing up without stability, trying to focus in school while lacking a permanent place to call home. And as the city continues to develop, luxury apartments rise where affordable housing once stood, turning neighborhoods into spaces that exclude the very people who built them. And amid this transformation, outreach workers walk the streets offering assistance. Some accepted, some refused, because trust is fragile when life has been defined by instability. And for those struggling with addiction, the grip of substances becomes both an escape and a trap, complicating efforts to regain footing. While mental health challenges remain both a cause and consequence of homelessness, often untreated due to limited access or stigma, and yet within these harsh conditions, resilience persists, seen in the small routines people create, finding a safe place to sleep, sharing food, forming communities among strangers, holding onto dignity in ways that often go unnoticed, and the broader system attempts to respond through shelters, supportive housing programs, and policy initiatives. But the scale of the problem continues to outpace the solutions, as rising rents and stagnant wages ensure that more people remain at risk. And the question becomes not just how to help those already homeless, but how to prevent others from falling into the same situation, requiring a deeper look at housing policy, healthcare access, job opportunities, and social safety nets. Because homelessness is not an isolated issue, but a reflection of multiple systems failing simultaneously. And as night falls over New York, the contrast becomes even sharper, with brightly lit apartments overlooking dark streets where individuals prepare for another uncertain night, some hopping for a bed in a shelter, others settling into doorways or subway cars, each person carrying a story that led them there. Stories of lost jobs, broken relationships, medical bills, eviction notices, or journeys that started in entirely different places but ended here. And while the city never sleeps, neither does the reality of homelessness, continuing in cycles that demand attention, empathy, and action. Because behind every rising home value statistic lies another story of someone pushed further away from stability. And until the balance shifts toward affordability, accessibility, and genuine support, the streets will continue to tell these stories over and over again. In a city known for opportunity, yet still searching for a way to ensure that opportunity is not reserved only for those who can afford it. And as this cycle continues, the deeper layers of the crisis begin to reveal themselves, showing that homelessness in New York is not just about lacking a roof, but about the erosion of identity, stability, and long-term hope, where days blur together and survival becomes the primary focus, leaving little room for planning a future. And yet, even in this uncertainty, many individuals hold onto fragments of their past lives, memories of careers, families, ambitions, reminding us that homelessness is often a temporary condition that can happen to almost anyone under the right pressures, especially in a city where a single missed paycheck or unexpected medical emergency can trigger a downward spiral. And within shelters, the experience is complex, sometimes offering safety and support, but also often marked by overcrowding, strict rules, lack of privacy, and emotional strain, leading some to choose the streets instead, valuing autonomy over structure despite the risks. And for families, the situation becomes even more fragile, as parents struggle to maintain a sense of normalcy for their children, waking them early for school from temporary housing, trying to hide the stress and fear, while children silently absorb the instability around them, shaping their development in ways that can last a lifetime. And beyond the visible struggles, there is an invisible layer of bureaucracy that governs access to help, where paperwork, waiting lists, eligibility requirements, and limited resources slow down the path to permanent housing, often discouraging those who need help the most. And at the same time, the city invests in solutions such as affordable housing initiatives and rental assistance programs. But these efforts face constant challenges from high demand, funding limitations, and the ever-increasing cost of land and construction, creating a gap between intention and impact. And as neighborhoods continue to gentrify, long-time residents are displaced, their communities transformed into spaces they can no longer afford, forcing them into unfamiliar environments or homelessness. And this displacement not only affects individuals, but also erodes cultural and social networks that once provided informal support systems, making recovery even more difficult. While on the streets, the daily reality remains harsh and unpredictable, with individuals constantly navigating issues of safety, whether access to food and basic hygiene, relying on public spaces, charities, and occasional acts of kindness to get through each day. And despite these challenges, there are moments of humanity that break through the struggle: strangers sharing meals, volunteers offering care, outreach workers building relationships over time, small acts that remind us that connection still exists even in the most difficult circumstances. And for those who manage to transition out of homelessness, the journey does not end with securing housing, as maintaining stability requires ongoing support, employment opportunities, mental health care, and a community that fosters inclusion rather than stigma, because reintegration into society can be just as challenging as surviving outside it, and many face barriers such as discrimination, gaps in employment history, or lack of affordable services, which can lead to cycles of returning to homelessness if not addressed properly. And this highlights the importance of long-term, sustainable solutions rather than temporary fixes, emphasizing prevention as much as intervention. By addressing the root causes such as income inequality, lack of affordable housing, insufficient health care, and systemic inequities that disproportionately affect marginalized groups, and as policymakers, organizations, and communities continue to search for answers, one thing becomes clear: homelessness is not an unsolvable problem, but it requires coordinated effort, empathy-driven policies, and a willingness to prioritize human dignity over profit and convenience. And as the city moves forward, the challenge remains to balance growth with inclusivity, ensuring that progress does not come at the cost of leaving thousands behind, because the true measure of a city's success is not only in its skyline or economy, but in how it cares for its most vulnerable residents. And until that balance is achieved, the streets of New York will continue to carry stories of struggle, resilience, and the ongoing fight for a place to call home. Even as solutions are discussed in policy rooms and city council meetings, the lived reality on the ground continues to evolve in ways that are often invisible to those not directly experiencing it, where survival strategies become more refined, more instinctive, as individuals learn which streets are safer at night, which subway lines stay warmer in winter, which shelters are more tolerable, and which hours of the day offer the best chance for a meal, forming an unspoken map of the city that exists parallel to the one used by commuters and tourists. And within this hidden map, there are rules, alliances, and routines that shape daily life, creating a form of structure within chaos. And yet this structure is fragile, easily disrupted by police sweeps, weather changes, or shifts in public policy. forcing constant adaptation. And for many, this instability leads to chronic stress, affecting both physical and mental health, where lack of sleep, poor nutrition, and exposure to the elements weaken the body over time, while isolation and uncertainty weigh heavily on the mind, creating cycles that are difficult to break without consistent support. And despite outreach programs expanding their efforts, there remains a gap between availability and accessibility, as trust must be built slowly, especially among those who have experienced repeated disappointments or trauma within institutional systems. And this trust becomes a critical factor in whether someone accepts help or continues to remain outside those systems. And at the same time, technology begins to play a role in new ways, with mobile phones becoming lifelines for communication, access to information, and even job opportunities. Yet access to charging, connectivity, and digital literacy creates another layer of inequality, highlighting how modern survival increasingly depends not just on physical resources, but also on digital inclusion. And while some individuals manage to navigate these systems and gradually rebuild stability, others remain caught in cycles that span years, even decades, becoming part of the city's long-term homeless population, where the line between temporary hardship and permanent condition begins to blur. And this raises deeper questions about how society defines and addresses homelessness, whether as an emergency to be managed or a structural issue to be fundamentally solved. And within this debate, different approaches emerge, from housing-first models that prioritize immediate access to permanent housing without preconditions, to more traditional systems that require individuals to meet certain criteria before receiving long-term assistance, each with its own challenges and successes, but all operating within the constraints of funding, political will, and public perception. And public perception itself plays a powerful role, influencing policy decisions and social attitudes, where narratives about homelessness can either generate empathy and support or reinforce stigma and distance, shaping how communities respond to those in need. And media representation becomes a key factor in this. As stories are told, images are shared, and opinions are formed, sometimes oversimplifying complex realities into easily digestible narratives that fail to capture the full scope of the issue. And yet within these narratives, there is an opportunity to shift perspectives, to highlight not just the struggles but also the systemic causes and the potential solutions, encouraging a more informed and compassionate response. And as the conversation continues to evolve, so too does the understanding that homelessness intersects with many other issues, including criminal justice, healthcare, education, and economic policy, requiring a coordinated cross-sector approach that moves beyond isolated interventions. And in this interconnected framework, prevention emerges as a critical focus, addressing factors such as eviction, unemployment, and healthcare costs before they lead to homelessness, reducing the inflow even as efforts continue to support those already affected. And this dual approach, prevention and intervention, offers a more balanced strategy, though it requires sustained commitment and resources over time. And as seasons change in New York, bringing both the harsh cold of winter and the intense heat of summer, the urgency of the issue becomes even more apparent, as extreme weather conditions amplify the risks faced by those without stable shelter, prompting emergency responses that, while necessary, also highlight the ongoing vulnerability of this population. And through it all, the human element remains at the center, reminding us that behind every policy, program, and statistic are individuals with unique stories, challenges, and potential, each deserving of dignity, stability, and the opportunity to rebuild. And as the city looks toward the future, the path forward will depend not only on economic growth or urban development, but on the choices made about inclusion, equity, and responsibility, shaping whether New York becomes a place where opportunity is accessible to all or one where the divide continues to widen, leaving the most vulnerable to navigate a system that has yet to fully meet their needs.